1983-84, we got the revised Code of Canon Law. The interesting thing about the Code of Canon Law is that when Pope John the 23rd on January 25th, 1959, at the Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls, at the end of the octave of Saints Peter and Paul, the Prayer for Christian Unity, when he announces his intention to convene an ecumenical council, he announces three things, actually, that he wants to do in his papacy. He wants to have a diocesan synod in Rome. By the way, that turned into a disaster, and a lot of people used it as an argument. If we can't have a synod in Rome, we sure as heck can't pull off a council. But anyway, so he said he wants to have a diocesan synod in Rome, which was mostly a symbolic statement reminding people he's only pope because he's, first of all, bishop of the local Church of Rome. Second, he said we have to revise the Code of Canon Law. The Code of Canon Law in force then had been promulgated in 1917. And third, I think we'll have a council, all right? Now, once the council got underway, it became very clear they couldn't revise the Code of Canon Law. You had to wait till Vatican II ended. So as soon as Vatican II ends, Pope Paul VI creates a commission that's concerned with the revision of the Code of Canon Law. And that's what we get in our current revised Code of Canon Law. And in many ways, it's faithful to Vatican II, though I would argue that it suffered from probably being put together too soon after the council. So that it's slavish in quoting Vatican II, but I think it missed some of the bigger themes of the council. So it quotes the council all over the place, but it's not consistent in integrating the council's insights. So for example, it doesn't, this is more insider baseball stuff, but it doesn't consistently structure the code around the Tria Munera, all right, and so on and so forth, the threefold offices of Christ as priest, prophet, and king. It has almost nothing about charisms, which the Second Vatican Council talked about, that all the baptized have charisms. There's very little about consulting the sense of the faithful. It has consultative mechanisms, but most of them are optional mechanisms, right? So one of the things that I think we have to do is a thorough revision of the Code of Canon Law, because canon law is not a bad thing. Canon law is one of the concrete ways in which we make actionable the council's vision of the church. But we need a code that serves the vision of the council, and consultation is a good example of it. So the synodality that Pope Francis is talking about is only in the most superficial way affirmed in the council, right? Diocesan synods are mentioned, but they're not required at all, right? Plenary councils are mentioned, but they're not required. Pastoral councils are encouraged, but they're not required. We have to have a finance council. We have to have a presbyteral council. We can have those other things, but we don't have to. All right, so what would happen if we made those things fundamental features of the church? If diocesan synods were a regular feature of the life of the church? What would happen if, for example, one of the great unrealized provisions of the Code of Canon Law requires a bishop or his proxy to visit every parish in his diocese once every 5 years? All right? Now, what if that weren't just checked off the box at confirmation? What if a bishop did go to every parish in his diocese, got up to an ambo like this, set up the microphone, and then says, for 2 hours, you talk, I will listen, and goes over there? What if a bishop did that as an ordinary part of his ministry in a diocese? That would be, I would suggest to you, transformative. What if our current practice for discerning who is called to the episcopate, a practice that has very little theological justification and is largely a 19th century historical creation, the way we currently choose bishops, what if we did something eminently conservative and went back to the practice of the early church where bishops were chosen only after a period of ecclesial discernment? How would that change things? What if we followed the conviction of the canons of the early church that prohibited ever transferring a bishop from one diocese to another because they knew if you did that, you would introduce careerism? And that if a bishop were married to his church, by the way, that's the significance of the episcopal ring, if he was married to his church, then maybe he would be more concerned about listening to them than thinking about what might garner advancement up the ecclesiastical ladder. Note that none of what I've just said here, none of it touches on church doctrine. This is all the concrete disciplinary practice of the church, which I would argue gets us closer to fidelity to our great tradition, brings us back to the rich understanding that the Holy Spirit is supposed to animate the whole church as a discerning community, without prejudice to the particular responsibilities of the ordained ministers of the church, which in our tradition are substantive. All right? So I just want to affirm what John was saying, and to say we've barely scratched the surface in terms of the kind of synodal structures that Pope Francis is talking about, and that I think the council bishops had in mind.